How's everyone doing? We're going to give everyone just a little bit of time to get connected, get on, get ready. I think the news was pretty interesting today. I think this week we have a few good things to cover. That yeah, I'm pretty excited about covering. So yeah, we have quite a bit in the security aspect of it. To be honest, that surprised me how many things that we had. Now, I have to ask you, I kind of have been condensing these into a weekly thing. Would you guys prefer to do them, you know, would you guys prefer to do them like as they happen more? So, I do stream throughout the week. We could cover news things and newsworthy things then, if you guys would like. I know we haven't been doing that. What do you guys like? Do you like how we're doing it? I'm just letting everybody know in the Discord channel that we're live, since there was the time change here in the States. So anybody that's maybe fallen behind a little bit. We'll jump into the news in just a second. Right. Yeah, we have quite a few interesting things. A couple interesting things in security. I tried to limit it to things that I found would probably be useful to a general audience. Everything from some malware that's been going on to an update on the SolarWinds breach. I know a lot of people know about the SolarWinds breach at this point, but there's actually been some new things that have come up about it. And then at the end of today, we are going to go into probably one of the more interesting things that happened. There was a outage in Cloudflare, and yeah. We're gonna go over their postmortem. Now, their postmortem wasn't as deep as I generally like, but I'm not sure if there was a whole lot more to cover there. I guess is maybe the thing. I'm not sure that there was more to cover there. It was pretty complete. It seemed like a pretty simple thing that happened, that went down. So anyways, we'll cover it more. We'll do that last. That's kind of the article that I have. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start out today with security like usual, like we all like to enjoy. I tried to limit this to things that are useful. There was like Avast was marking the Google Play Store as a virus, whether you like it tracking you or not, but it was marking it as a virus. I left those types of things out. I'm trying to whittle it down a little bit more to just useful stuff for developers. or things that tools you might be using that could have security vulnerabilities to it. I also excluded a Boeing hack. So Boeing got their data stolen, and it looks like they're actually, if you can believe the hackers, it looks like they're paying up because the hackers removed their stuff from their website. So I've removed those types of things to make it a little bit more focused. So let's jump into it. So the SEC charges SolarWinds and their chief information security officer with fraud. So a lot of breaches don't have their CEOs or the CISs, their chief information security officers, as well as the company, charged with fraud. But it turns out that I guess they oversold their security stance to their investors. So this has been a long time in the makings. Solar meltdown, or whatever they call it, the starburst, happened in 2012? 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. Sunburst. I thought it was. Anyways. Yeah, 2018. So basically they had stated that their security was a lot better than it was when they actually actively knew that they had problems. That is happening. I guess there was quite a few problems with actually not following their own protocol. So their own protocol wasn't being adhered to, the one that they stated that they were doing in their security and compliance reviews. So I guess that's where a lot of the fraud gets, because they actually knew that they weren't and were basically telling their employees not to follow that for speed or whatnot as whatnot. Their current, they have them like recorded as saying their current state of security leaves us in a very vulnerable state for critical assets, while telling investors that they were in a great place. So that's where the fraud comes in. That's kind of wrapping up 5 years now. That's a long investigation. It has been somebody's job for the last 5 years to dig into that. All right, something that's probably a little bit more important to you guys as of right now. If you guys are using Atlassian software, you need to patch now. In CVE 2023-22-51-8, improper authorization vulnerability in Confluence Data Center and Server. So if you're running this software yourself, if you're doing that, you need to patch now, because this is an active exploit that can cause you to lose data. And I know a lot of software engineering teams use Atlassian. So if this happens to be you, then you need to patch now. Now, as a note, Atlassian cloud sites are not affected by this vulnerability. So if you're paying Atlassian to run it for you, then you don't need to do anything at this point. Yes, sir, Russell. That's right. The US and UK are back to a 5-hour difference. I did an @ here. I try not to do @ here in Discord, just for people that might be caught off by it, since I knew the time change happened. Last week I missed it. Last week I missed it. So anyways, if you're doing this, make sure you patch. All right, let's move on. Researchers find 34 Windows drivers vulnerable to full device takeover. Now, Windows has this thing with drivers where basically drivers can get them signed by Microsoft effectively, so that they can effectively just be installed, and it's pretty nice. But 34 of them are basically viruses. Effectively, because these drivers have low level access. If there's something wrong in them, it's pretty bad. And worst case, so I know some of us use Windows. I don't use Windows a whole lot, but I do have Windows. There's several of them, like Dell's system. So if you're on a Dell system, Dell's has a vulnerability in it itself. So you're probably going to want to look into this and see what you can do. Let's see. Oh, here's the names of some of the vulnerable ones. I do believe you can find full lists in the CVEs. You know what? Let me post these for you guys in case you're running Windows. If you'd like the easy fix, I'm going to guys show you the easy fix to these vulnerabilities. Easy fix to these vulnerabilities is right here in this website. So if you're looking for the easy fix to make your computer more secure. Okay, moving on. Let me give you. The driver signing key was leaked last year, Russell. That was last year. I do believe it's been rotated, but you have to update Windows. There's like an overlap time because you have to update Windows to. But they have to have the same key for a little while, or duplicate keys. So yes, I think we're past that though. I think we're past that. So not entirely sure. Debian, if you want it stable, that's right, Scott. Scott 1969. I saw that you followed just before this started. I thought you had already followed, but I'm going to give you a shout out and say thank you. You didn't because the stream wasn't live. You didn't get that sweet AI generation, but thanks for following. Debian, I mean, Debian, there's Ubuntu's also a great one. If you're looking to get into Linux, there's a lot of great things out. You can join my stream and ask questions if you have questions. I'm not a Linux expert, but I do okay. All right. Okta hack blamed on an employee using personal Google account on company laptop. Now, This I found interesting because Okta came out, they had this latest security fiasco where they leaked a bunch of client stuff and basically were the entryway into hacking or attacking other cloud providers, Cloud One, Beyond Corp, and those things. And worst case, Okta was the one that failed to actually detect it, and Cloudflare, BeyondCorp, and those actually were the people that came out and were like, hey, you've been hacked. You've been hacked. Please take care of it. So this, I feel like, was Okta being like, oh, you know, it was an employee that didn't follow protocol. And I'm not saying that they didn't follow protocol, but if a single personal Google account on one of your computers can steal 1% of Okta's customer account, that feels rough. That feels rough. Feels a little bit. Feels a little bit like your security is not that great. And now I know that there's probably a lot of companies that would fall under this. A lot of companies would fall under this. I think Okta has to be held to a different standard of level since they're used to authenticate and authorize and like you are a security company when you are Okta. So I think they need to be held to a different. I think there's a lot of other companies that aren't security-based companies that would fall into this. So in that case, I don't think that they're any different. But it still feels pretty. It still feels pretty rough. And then I guess they leveraged that personal Google account to attack it. I guess it was a vulnerable Google account. So the other thing that was weird is the wording. They said most likely, like they weren't sure that this was the actual cause. They weren't sure that this was. They're still unsure is the effective thing. They're not completely sure. Now, interesting, Cloudflare, even though they had a pretty terrible weekend, we're going to talk about that at the end of the stream. Cloudflare introducing HAR sanitizer, secure HAR sharing. Now, another thing that Okta went on to blame in their report here was basically that customers were doing it wrong. They kind of threw the customers under the bench when they were saying, hey, we asked you to sanitize their heart, but they didn't give them any way of doing it or anything like that. And Cloudflare was like, okay, well, this isn't that hard. And so we did it in a week, 2 weeks. Maybe it was 2 weeks. So now you have a HAR file sanitizer to, sanitize your HAR files. If you need to share them and want to sanitize those session cookies and things out, Cloudflare has saved Okta. Right, Russell. That's what I read when I read Okta's thing. Was most likely we found this thing and we're just going to blame it on that. Which I don't like. To me, this is not a strong statement from Okta. It's not we did a really good job and we have the things in place to actually track this down. That's actually what terrifies me is we're like 2 months out and they still don't know what happened. And it means that they, as a security company, again, don't have the things in place to validate even what happened in a postmortem. It's pretty rough. It's pretty rough. The last thing that we have in security here was Stripefly malware operated unnoticed for 5 years, infecting 1 million devices. You know what? Does this need to be the first thing that the Null Cloud provides is HAR file sanitization as an open source project? Is that what we need? Is that what people need? If people need that, I will make that as an open source project so you can validate it. I'll run it, but you can also just run it yourself as well. I wonder if we can do it in a way where we can prove. I mean, if it's open infrastructure and I run it in such a way that like the deployment and everything is open, you don't have to trust me, right? We'll have to think about that. Because I don't want to just say, hey, trust me over Cloudflare. I think Cloudflare is a pretty stand-up company in general. I'm not sitting here vouching for them, and they haven't paid me anything to say anything. And we're going to be a little bit rough on their postmortem. They identified some stuff, but it's some bad stuff. So we're gonna talk about that. Definitely haven't paid me. Won't be paying me for today either. All right. Yeah, they're definitely not making money now. I don't know how much this last thing cost them, but it cost them quite dearly. I can assure you. Stripefly malware operated unnoticed for 5 years, infecting 1 million devices. Now, if somebody told you that crypto was too good to be true, well, there has been a crypto miner that has been kind of flying under the radar, not really mining crypto, but mining your system. And that's kind of what this has done. This probably should have been removed. I found it interesting. You guys got to be careful with what you do. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And that's what this was. People got it because it looked like a great crypto miner. But that's not really what it was. That's not really what it was doing. It promised a lot of good stuff, but it could download shell code. It could run stuff as an administrator on your Windows machine. It could access kernel. It had unrestricted access to kernel memory. It was pretty rough. All right. So, that's a weird. I have screwed up my. Yeah, I screwed that up. I'll need to look into that. All right. So let's talk about maybe the best thing to happen. I put this in cloud news. It's kind of cloud news because it's Microsoft, but Windows CE has a small portion of my heart and killed it. If you've ever gone to a US based restaurant and looked back in the kitchens, and there's those displays that have like they look ugly. They look ugly, but in my defense, that's actually on the people configuring them. Anyways, me and a couple other people made the software for most of that. That's mostly us. We're actually in the external. We're definitely in the external marketplace as well, external to the U.S. worldwide, but in the U.S. pretty dominant as far as the back of house kitchen software goes. Anyways, all of those are powered by these little CE devices, little, almost no resources, CE stupid devices. Absolutely the bane of my existence, and today is a good day. Windows CE, Microsoft's stunted middle child, reaches end of support at 26 years. This is a glorious day for us all. And I just want us to take a moment. And I love how Ars Technica put it. Microsoft stunted middle child. I'm a middle child. I'm like the worst type of middle child because like there was 8 of us. So I'm not even like the older of the middle. I'm the younger of the middle child. That is actually worse than being the solid middle when there's 2 middle and you're the younger. It's worse. So yeah. There you go. It's a glorious day. It's a glorious day. Thank you. I put that in the cloud news because I felt we needed it. Is the Null Cloud aiming to take back the kitchen, but with edge gates? Oh. So, we actually explored edge. Interestingly, we already were doing edge computing without Kubernetes. We actually, at the time, had explored deploying Kubernetes in these systems. The problem with restaurants, the problem with them are they run on really tight margins. So getting them to run 3 machines instead of 2 machines, you couldn't do it. Like, and these are not expensive machines. You're talking like, they were probably like $500 because they had like a 5-year and they were designed to work in a greasy kitchen. So like they were rugged, but I mean like the hardware was like $100 hardware. But yeah. Anyways, they were like $500. Getting a third one, almost impossible. You know how many times I responded to something where they're like, hey, your HA kitchen setup, which it was HA with 2 because there was like basically a hot failover, is down. And it's like, your switch, you plug them both into the same switch. And they're like, we're not buying 2 switches. It's supposed to be highly available. And I'm like, oh, there's nothing I can do. The switch is down. Like your switch. It's just... Sorry, you guys got me on a tangent. This is the news. That is old news. I mean, kitchens are still probably really stingy, but that's probably not old news. But yeah, it was a problem. All right, so web environment integrity. Yeah, I have kitchen nightmares. You want to know a kitchen nightmare? Valentine's Day. Ruined for life. You know, like I curl up in a ball on Valentine's Day. If you've ever had a service that one day out of the year has to scale 20 to 50 times your regular throughput, that is what happens. It's terrifying. It never works properly. You'll take your learnings from last year and you'll be like, okay, well, we know where it burned down last year, and it will burn down in a whole new way the next year. Because like just making something so elastic that it can scale that much in one evening is just, I have nightmares. Yes, Merrick's Kitchen nightmares. Those are fun times. Let's get back to the news. Web environment integrity. This was a proposal put by Google for Chrome. I know this is in the cloud news. Live with it. This is another celebration that we're having. Anyways, this was basically DRM for Chrome. DRM for Chrome. And now I have to say, Apple has already done this, and the only reason Apple has gotten away with it is almost nobody uses Safari. But Chrome dominates a lot of it. I mean, you're even talking about Edge uses Chromium in the back end. And so there was a lot of pushback on this, and thankfully, Google bends the integrity API. So it's not, they're not pushing for it anymore. Now, that being said, they are looking to do some revised versions of it for the Android web views and a couple like highly specific products. So we're going to have to still watch for that and see what that means. But the general idea for Chrome has kind of gone away. So I'm very, very excited about that. I'm very happy about that. When we're talking about Google Cloud, let's talk about their latest report. Their Q3 growth fell to 22%, which is still good, but much worse than the 28% the previous 2 quarters were. The weird part is their CEO blames organizations doing optimizations. Why I say that's strange is they're blaming people on like trying to reduce cost. But this is 4 months after people actually started tightening the belt and reducing costs. So it feels weird that that is their scapegoat. I feel like there's actually something else, but they weren't transparent with it. And maybe they don't know. Maybe it's just down a little bit and that's their best guess. I don't know. But everybody else, all the other clouds, actually saw drops in their quarters, the last 2 quarters. But if you notice, somebody like Azure actually had picked up growth this quarter. So again, it felt a little weird to me, but you know, for their sakes, hopefully that is it. That being said, Google Cloud did release some Vertex AI search with some new generative AI capabilities. So if you guys are looking to leverage Vertex for that, you know, please feel free to leverage it. Or read that blog post on the things that they're adding. That's more what I meant. I'm not giving you permission to leverage it. I wanted to ask a poll here. I wanted to ask all of you fantastic people. Do you think that Google is a leader in cloud Kubernetes? I don't mean in like actual Kubernetes itself, but when you think of which provider would I run Kubernetes in, would it be GCP? Like if that's all you had to do. So I'm gonna make a poll here. Can I make a poll? I want to make a poll. Poll. Yeah, here we go. Manage poll. New poll. Is GCP a leader in Kubernetes? Yes, no, maybe so. There you go. It's a drop in growth rate. I mean, obviously they are getting bigger. You're right, Russell. They were at 28% growth instead of 22% growth. So it is a drop in growth rate. It's a drop in growth rate, not a drop in growth. They didn't get smaller. They grew less quickly. AWS, for example, has been growing at 14% pretty consistently for the last year. And And Azure accelerated from 21% to 24%. That was the growth in Microsoft. So it is a drop in how fast they were growing. Yeah. So my personal opinion here, I don't know that their Kubernetes product is any more mature. I haven't seen it to be that. It's not a bad product. I like it, and it's simpler than some. I actually see a company like AWS who's done stuff with BottleRocket and some other serverless stuff as well, kind of exploring with Kubernetes and really trying to make Kubernetes more than what it is. They almost feel like they're leading the way and experimenting some. Google points to this, which if you watch my Kubernetes release notes, I actually cover how much each person contributes, which I don't know that this, they put the cloud providers here with cloud provider 1. I didn't come to the same numbers, to actually be honest. It was a little weird. Now, they definitely contribute the most by a lion's share, but I don't know. This is how they get those numbers here. But see, I think they're skipping to Microsoft. I'm not sure. I don't know if they're counting these two. Because this is roughly half, a little less than half. This doesn't look like a little less than half. I guess 40. Wait. Maybe it is. 1 second. Oh, I don't know where I clicked. There we go. 46,000 and 111,000. I don't know. This looks like 35,000 to me. Not 47,000. 47,000 should be really close to 50,000. It should be really close, especially this zoomed out when you're thinking this is 25,000. It looks a little, anyways, they do contribute a lot, but contributing to Kubernetes isn't necessarily what makes you a leader. And this is just, if you look at this is just to Kubernetes. So this is contributions to KK. So that's not like really expanding the whole thing. Okay, so we're a little tied. Like I said, I don't think that they've done a bad job. I just haven't. I'm gonna try to do the polls a little bit more in the news. Get your guys' opinion that way. I don't know. You guys let me know if you like it or hate it. Anyways, they definitely contribute the most to the open source project. You'll see that in my release notes. They're always the top by far. And yeah. All right. Other than that, there wasn't actually much else news from GCP. So we'll jump into AWS. In AWS, their App Runner now supports Internet Protocol version 6. I brought this up because if you're using App Runner, remember that in 2024, January 1st, 2024, IPv4 addresses are going to start costing you money. So you got to start moving things off to IPv6. Now, the cost is not astronomical. It's not an insane amount. So it's not like you're going to lose. But you want to start moving as many things off as you can, because if you use a lot, I mean, it could add up. It's like $10 per address per month. Don't quote me on that. I think that's what it is. It might be somewhere around there. This is another thing that was awesome is AWS Marketplace launched 2 new things that are going to help small development teams. First is the programmatic notification of AWS Marketplace Management Portal. So basically their AMMP portal was a disaster to keep up with if you tried to list something on there, and there was no basically invent hooks to let you know something happened. So you'd have basically just sit there and pull it all day long. Pretty terrible. This is a huge fix to it, and that's amazing. The other big thing that they did to the marketplace was to introduce the new self-service listing feature for container products. I wish that they would bring this to everything, because currently not everything is like this, where you actually have to have a marketplace representative and you have to fill out a spreadsheet that has columns way too far to the right, and you have to do this song and dance with them, and it's not a automated thing to have a marketplace listing. So I hope to see this roll out to more than just their container service, but this is a nice thing, container offering. AWS App Fabric now supports GitHub and ServiceNow, so definitely give that a check if you use GitHub and ServiceNow and you're using App Fabric to monitor all of those audit logs. So if you're using App Fabric for your audit logs and use either of these two things, you can now monitor them from a single location. As far as Azure goes, we have the public preview of Azure integration with Canonical Snapshot Service for safe deployment. So this is a partnership between Azure and Canonical to make it easier to stay current with your Linux operating system. Basically, it's just bringing, if you're using Ubuntu on Azure, you can now start using their snapshot service, which basically allows you to live patch your kernels in the cloud. So that's a way to, you don't never have to shut your server down, like reboot it, but it's a way to avoid doing it more than you have to. So that's pretty cool. TLS 1.2 is to become the minimum TLS version for Azure storage. So if you're using Azure storage and you're using TLS 1.1, which I think is like 12 years old, don't quote me on this. Don't quote me on this. I think TLS 1.2 is like 12 years old. It's going away. It's going away. So make sure that you're updated if you're using the Azure storage and using an older TLS. We talked about this earlier, but gRPC support for Azure App Service has gone GA. We talked about it when it went in public preview. So now you can use it in your production apps. Did anybody else see anything in, oops, not that one. Not that one. Did anybody else see anything in the cloud news? I have some open source stuff to talk about. We have some pretty awesome open source to talk about, from Kubernetes to C++. Had something pretty exciting that I'm going to share with you guys. Some developments in Rust. Yeah. All right, well, we'll jump into the open source news now. Gateway API version 1 GA is released. So if you've ever used Istio has this concept of gateways and HTTP routes and things like that were never native to Kubernetes. And they did it because Kubernetes had no way natively of doing it. And now there is. I believe, now don't quote me, I need to talk to somebody else about this before it's quote worthy. I believe that this is the way forward to leverage these. Even if you're using Istio, I believe that Istio will respect these. Now, again, I don't quote me on that, but I believe that is at least what they're looking to go to. I believe that Istio only made their own because they needed to. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about this. I do have somebody. Oh, Insolvent's Tetragon? reach 1.0? We should cover that. Reinvent is in like 2 weeks. Reinvent is in 2 weeks. So I do expect the clouds to be somewhat calm for the next 2 weeks, as generally, again, what I see is reinvent happens and then Microsoft at least releases like a week later, 2 weeks later. They release something on just the topics they think they beat AWS at. I don't think it's everything that they have ready to release. They just do like a cherry pick thing where they're like, oh, we look really good at this compared to what was released. That's generally what I see. The new .NET is out mid-November. Do you want to come on and talk about the new exciting things in the new .NET, Russell? If we can line somebody up, I would love to talk to somebody about what's new in the new .NET. It's going to be more stable and faster. Okay, that makes sense. All right. So this next thing is from a person who I refuse to state their name in public, mostly because I will destroy it. And I know this because his website has how to pronounce his name. I've listened to it. I don't think my tongue can do that. But this was actually a really cool presentation. Now, I know Voldemort. All right, well, I know that a lot of us don't like C++. But this was actually a really cool presentation done by our favorite C++ person that we will not name. That is, I thought it was a really good discussion about the future of C++ and how to make it safer with module support, with these types of things. So I thought it was a good presentation. It doesn't mean that I'm switching to C++ from Rust or anything like that. By no means. What this was a really interesting dive into what it will take and how it could work. He's worse than Voldemort. As well as I think there was some really, really interesting points that he brought up around things like, we talk a lot about memory safety, but what about thread safety? What about these things and how those could? So it's not just about memory safety in C++. It's about thread safety, execution safety, file access, and module safety support, instead of just like statically linking stuff. So I thought it was a really cool overarching idea where there's a lot of things in those types of things to do. So again, whether yes, he seems like I don't know him personally, but he seems like a decent guy, and he does share his knowledge happily. So anyways, that was a really cool little, it's like an hour long. I watched the whole thing. I'm probably going to watch it again because, like I said, it went into the whole spectrum of a safe language. Now, whether you like C++ or not, I'm not here to argue that. The idea was that I learned stuff from him listening to it. So, all right. Rust is getting a really good intro into Android. So Binder, if you've ever done Android application development, is how basically inner applications talk together. It's how they chat together. It's the internal thing. Anyways, because of that, security is a huge issue with it. And actually, Android has had its largest I'm going to say its largest, but some really big and very painful security exploits from Binder. And it is getting a rewrite in Rust, which I think is awesome. It's deepening Android's usefulness. And yeah, basically we're generally not proponents of rewrites. So why rewrite Binder? And basically it goes into things to improve 1,000-line functions. Anyways, critical security and some things like that. So I thought this was pretty cool. They go into pretty good detail, so it's worth checking out. But I also thought it was worth just announcing because, yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And they go into like why they will rewrite it. Again, a lot of times maybe we're too happy to rewrite stuff in a language that we're liking more these days when it's not really needed. But this kind of defends why it was an important thing. Another one of these, I do watch for a few different Git pull requests. Anyways, get a pull request to 6.7 for print K for K threads. So this is going to basically make the real-time kernel better. Basically, it's bringing a better one of the things, if you didn't know, it was printing is a problem in the real-time kernel for I want to say it was ARM. There's a couple things to go about it, but you can read more about it here. And so print K is basically the fix for that. So I'm pretty excited about it because it should bring better support for embedded devices, real-time devices, and things like that. So yeah, that's pretty awesome. I'm excited about it. So we'll see. Hopefully it gets accepted. GitHub has multiple account support now, so you can switch account and remember your account so you don't have to keep logging in and logging out. This is absolutely huge. I have requested this previously with my GitHub representative, and I'm going to pretend it was my influence that brought this to you guys, so you can thank me. Probably wasn't me. I have two things that I have asked for, and both things have gotten implemented at this point. Switching the accounts, where you have multiple accounts, and access keys that aren't just full access, because previously it was just like, yeah, you can make an SSH key, screw you. And they finally have implemented that too. So I'm pretty happy. You know what, Russell? You're asking if print K is more than just buffered writes. I don't think it's. I think it's much more than just buffered writes. Yes, basically it's a rewrite for threading issues. So basically on the real-time and ARM, there's a combination that ARM threads differently. Their CPUs thread differently. I only know this because we've had to do threading updates to support ARM, because basically guarantees that you could assume were guarantees in oops, wrong one again. I need to fix that. Basically guarantees that you could make in a AMD 64 don't hold true in a ARM. And so basically I believe this is a pretty heavy rewrite, maybe not a complete rewrite, but a pretty heavy redesign maybe is the... But that being said, I haven't looked at the code a whole lot. So like I couldn't tell you how it's redesigned. Maybe it's redesigned by doing something with buffered writes. I couldn't tell you at this point. Sorry. All right, we have talked a lot about supply chain security. And you're going to say, Merrick, we're in open source. We're not talking about security now. But we're going to talk about security now because Chainguard raised $61 million in a Series B round as enterprise. Now, one thing you guys might be like, Chainguard sounds really familiar. And Chainguard sounds familiar to you because we had Dan Lornick on here from Chainguard to talk to us and help us understand, how how we can sign and secure our artifacts a little bit better. I'm hoping to have Dan Lornick on here again in the future to go over some other topics with us, because absolutely, well, one, I loved his conversation. Two, I learned a lot about interviewing somebody there, so hopefully I'll interview a little bit better. And Chainguard really focuses on, they do have some open source projects. You can go check out Chainguard's open source projects, but they really are looking to help secure open source projects, which is something that I think has really been needed for a long time. And so, yeah, they raised a bunch of money to do it. So congratulations to them. I need to ask Dan how to pronounce his last name. I'm pretty sure I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure I said it in our thing, and I think I saw him smirk as I was editing it. So I'm pretty sure that he's just a really nice person and didn't correct me. You would be surprised. People actually mispronounce my name all the time. It's C-O-U-N-T-S, Counts. You'd be like, how do they They say Kuntz all the time. They cannot assume that somebody's last name is Counts. So if they just read it, they're like, oh, Kuntz. No. It's just English. Anyways, last thing we have for today is the Cloudflare postmortem for their control plane and analytics outage. Before Twitter me Elmo. That's pretty good. I like that. I haven't known, I haven't done a whole lot with Chainguard before, but it looks interesting. I've been exploring it as of late with what they're doing, and open source supply chain is difficult. And so what they're doing and some of the stuff they're doing to open source, it's pretty cool. So I hope to get Dan on a few more times in the future. They've hired a lot of people. Awesome. Seem like smart people. All right. Are you guys ready for a postmortem on Cloudflare control plane and analytics outage? Now, I've gone over this. This isn't me. I won't read it line by line. I'm going to summarize each line. Feel free to pick out points and ask me questions if I know more about it, because I have done a little bit of investigation here. I have... I probably made somebody mad, but the Flexidital, or I don't know how to pronounce it. I call it Flex Eternal, but maybe that's not what it is. Flex Etanial. I'm not sure. The data center that had a problem. I've emailed them asking for comment. Haven't responded to me. So anyways, basically, I'm going to give you a high-level rundown of what happened with Cloudflare. Now, there was miniature outages across the web. NPM had an outage, which I'm pretty sure was partially due to Cloudflare's outage. There was a slowdowns around some stuff. But the worst part was, if you were a Cloudflare customer, you couldn't access anything. Now, there is a really good distinction here that I think anybody that's trying to build a service should actually do, and this is something I have preached for years at this point, but it's separating the control plane from the data plane. And basically what I mean, we'll get into that. We'll get into that. So, postmortem on a Cloudflare control plane and analytics outage beginning Thursday at 11 UTC, 11:43 UTC. They experienced an outage. Now, one of the worst parts about this outage was that the whole thing lasted 36 hours. It was not a short 30 minutes. We're back up. It's 2 days of outage. Now, how did this happen? Well, they have this pretty picture. And effectively what happened is this is the data center. And this data center has 10 generators. And they have two main utility feeds. Each main utility feed can support the entire data center. What happened is this power feed went down. Now, the standard operating procedures. Yeah, it's always fun when the observability stack is on the same infra as the things that it's observing. Absolutely. That's why you have to separate those things. They got to be separated, because if they're not, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So this B feed went down. Now, the standard operating procedure for the data center is to cut the A feed and run only on the generators until both feeds are back up and online. Now, the data center did not do that, and I kind of get a little seething from here. If you read through this, Cloudflare seems very angry. You know how they wrote that kind of open-ended angry letter about Okta's incident and how they had to catch it? The same type of feeling I get from this. They stay professional, but I get the same type of feeling. So the standard operating procedure is if one of these feeds goes down, they cut the other feed and run only off their generators until the other feed is back online. Now, they didn't do this. Now, Cloudflare surmises that the reason they didn't do that is because this feed went down, that they were actually using the generators, which can generate more power than needed, to actually supplement the other utility, which was experiencing higher demand. Now, the thing is, in their contract with Cloudflare, which uses more than 10% of their, like I said, I've read a lot of this, so that uses more than 10% of their data center space, was not aware of this plan, and still aren't. They said that the data center hasn't gotten back to them. Actually, it stated it right here. Approximately 10% of its total capacity. Anyways, so their idea is that they were feeding power back into the utilities since they were, struggling. The problem is because they didn't follow standard operating procedure. If they had cut utility feed A, they wouldn't have suffered. And the reason is that there was a transformer that blew right here and sent a spike into the data center. The data center specifically has things that are very sensitive to spikes, and so it shut down all the generators. Every single generator shut down, and it shut down feed A, which meant the entire data center went dark. Now, the data center had batteries that were supposed to last for at least 10 minutes to allow them to get the generators back online. The problem was they didn't actually last 10 minutes and failed after about 3 minutes of the data center losing power, which meant the entire data center was brought to its knees. Now, the standard, to make things worse, there was only one tech on duty that had only worked there for less than a week at that point. To make everything even worse, I feel horrible for that one tech. All right, so this one tech, obviously a little, that poor tech, the worst first week of his life. Guarantee you, they were not having fun. That poor tech is not having fun, and I feel for them. I feel wholeheartedly for them. Okay, so, but the problems don't end there. So this is one data center of 3, so they have a high availability. The problem with this, and this comes into their postmortem, is that not everything in this data center ran off their high availability cluster. So there were some things very specifically about this cluster that they needed to come back online. And this is part of where they say that they have really failed, because that shouldn't have happened. So around 8 UTC, they figured out this wasn't coming back online nearly fast enough, and they failed over to their emergency cluster. So they have an emergency cluster in the UK that is basically a warm standby. But the problem was there was services, their analytics, that needed this data center to be running. Now, the problem gets worse. They have this one tech, the tech with the worst first week in their lives, hopefully. And the breakers for their data center, for their stuff. So Cloudflare's on their own breakers. This is pretty standard for big customers, are on their own breakers. And the standard operating procedure to not basically swamp their data center when they power everything on is to power up individual racks at a time. So when they finally restore power to they finally get the generators back up and going, the breakers all failed. All the breakers for them failed, and they only had one on hand. So they needed something like 50 of them, and they only had one on hand. That's when Cloudflare fell over to their emergency cluster in the EU, was when they were like, well, we only have one on hand. It's actually impossible for us to actually turn your servers back on. It's just impossible. We can't do it. So that's when they failed over. Was as soon as they got confirmation that this data center was messed up beyond all repair at that point. So now, when their redundant data emergency center came up in the EU, that's when they noticed that they had more problems than just that. And there was things that required this cluster, this piece of it working. So anyways, that is one, this Flexitel, I don't know how to pronounce their name. They haven't responded to my email. I think is in very hot water with Cloudflare, but Cloudflare failed pretty hard on everything. Now they have attempting to restore power. All right. So designing for data center level failures. Yes. So the breakers flipped when they got the spike from here. So basically, they're not sure. There was some speculation that the spike is the thing that actually destroyed the breakers. So they got a surge, a massive surge. I don't remember. We can look for it, but they got a massive surge off of the utility feed that was still active when that transformer blew. And they're not sure if the breakers just were degraded in the first place and flipping for one time they were just never going to come back, or if the surge is the thing that broke them. Yeah. Yep. Now, and this is where Cloudflare is a little salty, because if they had gone under the standard operating procedures, which they had told Cloudflare they would do, they would have cut this and just run off of their generators, because that's the standard operating procedure. And they wouldn't have gotten the spike then, because they had plenty of capacity. Their generators can run them like double capacity effectively. So yeah, and then how do they not have the spare breakers? This is everything why Cloudflare was kind of seething in this article. I'm not going to lie. You should read it. Did I paste it? I'm going to paste it. I'm not going to say seething, but like they specifically called things out that were like, they didn't have players. Now, what I do like is while at the first half of this, they kind of squarely lay the blame of the whole fiasco at Flexiternal's feet. They come out with some things that they could have done better. Now, this is a day later. They were able to get the power restored, and they finally got their whole system back online. November 13th, we began restoring services in PDX 04. This is what I want to bring our attention to is lessons and remediations. I'm guessing all their other data centers they have contract with are being audited. Yes, that's what I'm assuming. And they're rewriting their contracts. Any contracts that come up for renewal are going to have things about like, you have this many breakers. You have enough breakers to replace every single one of them that we have, period. Even better. So this tech that was on duty. All right. So the data center loses power. And the UPSs go down after 3 minutes. It gets better. They didn't have a dedicated system for their badge readers. So they got locked out of the data center. So they couldn't even access it. So I'm guessing they had to like get a welder in or bust something down, because that was one of the things, was that when the whole data center lost power, they didn't have a dedicated system for their access control. And minimum of 1 year's worth of experience on the floor at any time. Absolutely. That was dumb. That was dumb. Minimum of 1 year of experience. Every data center is different. That was really bad on their part. But they couldn't even access. So Cloudflare basically sent a team there because they were like, hey, we're doing whatever we can do. And nobody could access it. Even the technician that was on in site couldn't access anything. AWS or Facebook might have. It shouldn't be. It should have its own backup power. Like, it should require so little power. Like, you should be able to run that for a day without power. So this is the really interesting point, and I hope that if everybody doesn't read all the other stuff above, which I did summarize in pretty great detail, is designing for data center level failure. So if you're really trying to provide those 4 nines or those types of things, you have to design for data level failure. So I think this is the really good key takeaway. And if you notice where the scroll bar is over here, you can see we're about halfway through. So they actually spend a lot of reflection on where they screwed up, because their effective stance was, okay, Flexiternal might have screwed up, and there might be a lot of fault of why Flexiternal failed and it shouldn't have. But at the end of the day, if you're depending on us as a provider, we should provide to you the ability for any of our data centers to fail completely and not interrupt your stuff. Now, I don't think if you're a small, scrappy startup, and Cloudflare is beyond that you have to worry about this, because it's going to cost you. And that's actually one of the things the cloud can bring you pretty easily, is failure of a data center. Look at AWS's regions. It makes it fairly easy for you to run something in a distributed sense that has replications. So if you're really small, that's how you can do it. But if you're somebody like Cloudflare, this is a necessity. Now, I do believe we need to bust out a little bit of drawing here. We're gonna bust out just a little bit of drawing, because I think one of the key things, and this is something I have always really pushed on here, when you're designing something, is the separation of the data plane and the control plane. You can kind of I'm going to talk about it in simple terms here, but the control plane is basically how you configure the thing, how you change the thing, but it's not the actual running of the thing. And the running of the thing shouldn't depend on the control plane being healthy at any point in time. And your analytics should not run beside your thing. So take EC2 as an example. So let's say this is an EC2 node. Okay. It's black. Oh, you know what? 1 second. I have there we go. You have this EC2 instance. All right. These are your EC2 instances. Now you have somewhere a control plane over here. I can't see while I'm typing, but as soon as I click on, okay, whatever. I think I have something that's not playing well with this, but all right. Anyways, the important part is this can go away, and these should continue to run. Without this, maybe you can't add a new one. Let's say you wanted to have a fourth EC2. You might not be able to add a fourth EC2. You might not be able to change the configurations of these two, but this going down shouldn't affect these running. The other thing is, if you assume that these are also going to run your analytics and these stop running for some reason, you won't know. It's actually one of the reasons I say status pages are harder than people think. It's because a status page can't run on your infrastructure. It can't run connected to your thing. Because if your status page runs here, if this is your status page, and all of your other stuff runs here and here and here and here and here, and these go down, so does your status page. This actually happened to AWS in 2016 when they had their massive outage when US East 1 bit the dust, because their status page was based out of US East 1. Status pages are very hard to do because they have to be outside of everything. So when you're designing a SaaS, you should think about it as your control plane and your data plane. And those two shouldn't need each other to operate. Those two shouldn't intermingle ever. And then I would say the third thing is your analytics shouldn't need either one of those either. So your analytics shouldn't need your control plane or your data plane to operate. Now, they go into great depth of how they are going to, a lot of things that they're going to do better about this. So one of the things was that the other two data centers running in the area were supposed to take responsibility for the high availability of the cluster and keep critical services online. They state that generally that worked as planned. Unfortunately, we discovered that a subset of services, analytics, that were supposed to be on the high availability cluster had dependencies on services exclusively running in PDX04. So this is what basically happened and brought everything down, was that there was an exclusive subset of services that only ran in PDX04 in that cluster. And so without that, those things, the two critical services that process logs and power analytics, Kafka and ClickHouse, were only available in this is actually pretty bad, that their Kafka and ClickHouse were only available in PDX04. This is a pretty bad admission on their part, that those things were not made as high availability. Your first multi-cloud step should be your observability. Actually, that's a really nice take. I'm tweeting that. This is very much, if you don't test your DR, you don't have DR. That was going to be my next point. They stated to their chagrin, I'm sure, that they tested every data center going offline except for PDX04, which was a horrible oversight in theirs. Literally, this one data center, they were like, nah, that would be too painful to test. They had tested every other data center going offline, though. Another interesting take from this, from their retrospective here that they were talking about, which I kind of think is nice. I kind of think this is interesting. I think they need to update it. But I guess using the high availability cluster, using that high availability system, takes a little bit of extra work and requires holding to some very strict things and whatnot. So new services generally aren't required to use that until they're GA. The problem that happened was that there was a couple services, their analytics and logs, that slipped through that went GA without the requirement of being on the high availability cluster. And that's what has caused all of this. So then they had the standard thrashing of the services. Basically, another problem with their recovery, that their disaster recovery data center that they stood up in Europe, was that all of a sudden when they stood it up, it got flooded with requests. Obviously, they did say that they started doing rate limiting, but it brought the cluster down the first time it stood up because it just got flooded. But that was an easy solve, but it did take them time. So anyways, I would read this. I would read the lessons and remediations. They had very strong words for themselves. They were very hard on themselves. And that I was happy with. I was happy that they didn't just blame the data center, which screwed up. They also blamed how they have dropped the ball on some of their policies. So that's it. I do believe when they say I am sorry and embarrassed that they are actually embarrassed. I don't think that this was any one person's fault. This sounds like a cacophony of errors that proved they didn't have what they thought that they had, and they didn't have it because over the years, there was a couple services that just depended on this Kafka thing that wasn't in their high availability service. I don't know what this high availability service is and why it's so much harder to integrate with than their Kafka, or why Kafka isn't high availability. That I don't know. Those questions linger in my mind because it doesn't seem reasonable. It's easy enough to run Kafka in a 3 data center thing. Their data centers, while on separate power, are really close to each other, so they can have a Kafka cluster spread off across those 3 data centers because they have direct connections to each other. Virtually no latency between them. So I'm not entirely sure. So some of those things sound a little suspicious to me. Why wasn't the Kafka cluster highly available? Why was it only running on PDX04? Why do I know the names of their data center off the top of my head? Why do I know? I dug deep into this. I read some other things. I tried to find as much information as I could, not just theirs. I tried to get Flexiternal, maybe Ethereal, and Flex Intial. I don't know. I'm gonna call it the Flexi data center. The Flexi data center. Anyways, I tried to contact them, didn't get it, but I would love to interview that poor tech. I would love to interview that poor tech. Because that poor tech, I feel bad for them. I really do. I don't even care if that tech had worked at that data center for 6 years. It would have been a rough night But being a week on duty, ooh, ooh. No, I don't know the name of the poor tech. I would be happy to know the name of the poor tech. But yeah, that was the Cloudflare outage, which had implications for things like NPM. They were down for a little bit with it. Now, most of Cloudflare continued to work, which is a good design. So most of their core infrastructure could run without the control plane, and it could operate fine without those things, which it is indicative of a design. You have it as disconnected as possible, so if one part of the solution fails, everything else can continue running. You know, we need to know if they're still working there after a year, and then interview after all the pain is hopefully gone. They need a week off, like just 2 weeks off. What is it called when you're mourning for a death in the family? What is that called? There's a name for that. They need bereavement. It's not bereavement. I don't know why I'm struggling with this. Breftment. They need that. They need that for the next 2 weeks. Yeah. Bereavement. Okay, I was really close. I need the word. They need that. There was a death in their soul. All right. Well, that was it for the news today. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. Would you prefer that I read this line by line or to summarize it like I did? I tried to make it go faster. I probably missed a few small things, but I read this like 3 times already, as well as some other stuff to try to bring in as much as I could, as much information as I could. I did post the link in case you guys want to read it and understand it more yourself. I think the real takeaway is if you're going to be a Cloudflare, you need to make sure that everything is designed for an entire data center to just disappear, because that's what happened. And they found out they couldn't sustain losing this data center. I think that that's not needed for a lot of people, to be fair. To be fair, I don't think a lot of people need that. That if you lose your cloud provider, that you're also just down. But if you do need that, you know, cloud providers have different data centers. They have different regions, which are generally different data centers, unless you're in GCP. And they have availability zones, which that's actually what I meant. They have different availability zones, which are actually different data centers on their own power and their own internet that are really close to each other, so they can talk to each other really fast, that are different data centers, except for GCP. GCP's availability zones don't necessarily mean different data centers, which is probably a problem, but we don't need to talk about that. So yeah, and it is kind of long. I don't know. Reading it line by line probably would have been quite a while. It has quite a bit of stuff. I encourage you to read it. Yeah. Anyways, thanks everybody for joining. I hope you enjoyed that. I can't wait for the Null Cloud to have its first big incident. And have yourselves a fantastic next week. See you guys later.